Cool.
Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone who's joining us. Welcome, welcome. If you would do us a big favor, if you're joining us and you are not a panelist, could you please turn your camera off and stay muted? It's not that we don't love your faces, but we want to be able to focus on our amazing panelists. So we appreciate you going on mute. And there we go. Thank you. So everyone, welcome. Thank you. I'm Jamie Seward. I'm the Associate Director of Affinity Engagement Programs with the Office of Alumni Relations. Before we proceed, I'd like to acknowledge our co-sponsors, the Johns Hopkins University Film and Media Studies Department, the Hopkins School, and the Hopkins and Hollywood Affinity Group. Now, the program is going to begin with a panel discussion moderated by our special guest, Luke Kelly-Clyne. We're so happy to have him here. He's graciously agreed to do this for us again. And our amazing panel includes Diana Peralta, Zach Balon, Ryan Cunningham, Claire Richardson, Brian Scope, and Jane Goldenring. And after the panel discussion, the panelists will leave you time for some Q&A. And if you wouldn't mind, please put the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We don't want it to get lost in the chat. So after the Q&A, around at 8 p.m., we're going to go into breakout rooms. You can choose your own breakout room. You have the freedom to do that. So please just go to the breakout room with the panelist of your choice. And we also have an alumni breakout room if you want to just mix and mingle with some alumni. So now I have the pleasure of turning the program over to Linda DeLibero, Special Advocate for Alumni and Outreach with the Film and Media Studies Department. Linda?
Thank you, Jamie. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our panel. I'm Linda DeLibero. I'm a senior lecturer and advocate for Alumni and Outreach in the Film and Media Studies program at Johns Hopkins. And I'm so happy you can be here for this event, which marks the 7th year that the Hopkins Alumni Association and our Film and Media Studies program have co-hosted this January Hopkins and Hollywood panel. And this is the 2nd year we've been fortunate enough to team up with the Hopkins School. This yearly event began as a centerpiece of an annual Intersession field trip to LA, which introduces 8 of our students to alumni and other partners who work in the industry and gives them a week-long glimpse into the ways that Hollywood works. This year, of course, is a little different, like just about everything else. But we felt it was important to continue the tradition virtually, especially for our seniors who plan to make their way as writers, producers, directors, and editors in this brand new and really unknown landscape ahead of us. I want to thank the amazing and indefatigable Jamie Seward for once again organizing this event, and Melissa Capello, our FMS administrator extraordinaire, for all the work she does this week and throughout the year for our students. And of course, thank you so much to our panelists, alumni of Film and Media Studies and of the Hopkins School, for your generous donation of your time and your insights. I can't tell you how much we appreciate you being here. You are the best. I'd also like to take a moment to remember Jonathan Gross, a 2005 FMS alumnus, former student, and dear friend, who died last week. Jonathan was a talent manager and a mainstay of this LA trip. He was a passionate champion of our students and of this program, and we will miss him very, very much. And now I'd like to introduce Luke Kelly-Clyne, who will be our moderator for the evening. Luke is the president of Propagate Content's comedy studio, Big Breakfast, and is the executive producer of True TV's Double Cross with Blake Griffin, CBS All Access's Remote, Comedy Central's Lofi, creator and executive producer of Facebook Watch's I Want My Phone Back, and showrunner and executive producer of Pop TV's Hot Date. And he's most certainly involved in probably at least a dozen other amazing projects. But no matter how busy he is, he always makes the time to help our students and fellow alums in ways that are immeasurably valuable. And we are so appreciative of you, Luke. This couldn't happen without you.
Linda, thank you so much. Can you follow me around in my day-to-day life and just sort of like give that spiel as I get coffee and stuff? That would be Just great. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and thank you so much to all of you who've joined. I now see 6 screens deep on my Brady Bunch grid view. It's not quite what the in-person experience is, but we'll try to have some fun this evening. And so thank you, and thank you to our panelists for joining. I'm now going to attempt an even better introduction for each one of our panelists. I'm not going to be able to beat Linda, but I'm going to try. We have some wonderfully talented people on our virtual stage tonight. First is Zach Balon, who's a Johns Hopkins Arts and Science graduate and also the co-founder of Youngblood Pictures. Zach is LA based. He's a screenwriter and co-founder of Youngblood Pictures. His script, King Richard, about the father of tennis greats Venus and Serena Williams, was #2 on the 2018 Blacklist and is currently in production at Warner Brothers. He's currently also writing Creed 3 for MGM, pretty impressive, and has written projects for Lionsgate, Imagine, TNT. The list goes on and on and on. Zach, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Hi there, thanks for having us.
Yeah, we have Diana Peralta as well, who's a JHU 2011 grad, making me feel old. She's a director, writer, producer. Her debut film, De Lo Mio, on HBO, had its world premiere as the closing night film of BAM Cinema Fest in June of 2019, when the world was normal, and was picked up for distribution by HBO in 2020. Welcome to you, Diana, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, guys. So nice to see you all.
Yeah, you too. Jane Goldenring is our first Hopkins School alum, class of 73. She's the president of Goldenring Productions, film and TV producer with over 30 years experience. Started out producing documentaries for Turner Broadcasting and then worked as an executive for 12 years at Walt Disney Pictures, where she supervised over 40 films, including The Rocketeer, White Fang, Phenomenon, The Ref, and Adventures in Babysitting. Jane, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Also,
Nice to see everybody.
I want to read your entire blurb.
No,
We would be here.
No.
You've done quite a few things. We're going to hear about them tonight. We'd be here for 2.5 hours.
I'm producing on my own for 20 years, so you don't have to go into all of that. That's okay.
Claire Richardson, a JHU Arts and Sciences 2012 alum. She's a senior scout in film and TV at Maria B. Campbell Associates, where she oversees all film and TV book scouting for Netflix. Welcome, Claire. Great to have you with us.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Of course. Couple more guys, then we're going to hit it. We have Brian Scope, who's a Hopkins School 1997 alum, founding partner of Whiz Bang, veteran EP, director, showrunner. He specializes in documentary television. We are lucky enough, actually, at Propagate to have several projects with Brian, and he's originally from New Haven, Northwestern grad, an all-around genius. Let's put it that way. Welcome to you, Brian, and thank you.
I'll take it. I will take it. Thank you.
And then we have Ryan Cunningham, our last, not least panelist, JHU Arts and Sciences class of 2015, who was a creative executive at Temple Hill Entertainment. He was also captain of the varsity swim team while at Hopkins. Pretty cool. Thank you so much for being with us.
I couldn't go on this trip when I was a senior.
That's it. And now he lives in a lovely apartment / Zoom background, but we won't tell you which is which. Guys, thank you all. Let's kick off for our first question. This is for Zach and Diane. Let's hear from Diane first, and then we can move over to Zach. Can you talk about, a little bit about what your writing process is? Writing per se is such a daunting thing to so many graduates who are thinking about pursuing a career in that space. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just helpful to hear, how do you break it down?
Yeah, of course. So I'm actually, De Lo Mio was my first feature and my first kind of foray into being a director and writer. It was the first screenplay I ever written. And I think it took 6 years to write, and it ended up being like a 75-page script, which is really unusual, not a dialogue heavy film, but I think it took so long because I didn't have a writing practice and I didn't have the confidence right out of college to feel like I could write and be a writer, or whatever you call the label. So it took me 6 years to do it, to quit my day job and to like kind of commit to making this project. But since then, seeing something I've worked on from writing to happening in front of me on set to being premiered in a theater or on HBO. I think that's given me, you know, the confidence I need to consider myself a writer and to start taking my writing practice seriously. So literally quit my day job. Again, something that you'll learn, at least in my experience after film school, is like you'll always have a day job no matter what you do, unfortunately, until you make it big or whatever. But quit my day job again 2 months ago in the middle of COVID, which is probably pretty irresponsible. But because I wanted to take my writing practice seriously, and I've been writing my second feature for the last 2 months. And in that process, I've kind of figured out what works for me. And I'm really excited to hear what Zach has to say, because he's obviously a way more experienced writer than me. But something I've learned works is to not, writing can be really difficult. You have to be in the right mindset. You have to, it's also a discipline. So you have to stick to it and do it every day as much as you can. Something that's been working for me is not forcing myself to say, I'm going to write for 8 hours today, because it's just like totally impossible. And that automatically will create a mental block for me. And I'll get stuck, kind of just daunted by the amount of time I've set aside for myself. So I started doing this thing called the kitchen timer method. I'm sure you guys have heard of it before, where you just put an hour, whatever time you have that day. And that's what you're doing. You're turning off your phone, you're turning off all your distractions, and you're just sitting and thinking. And that can be actively writing, that can be free writing, that can just be daydreaming, whatever it takes to get you in that mindset. You're going to spend an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours just doing that. And whatever you get on the page, as soon as the timer's up, you're done, pencils down, and you move on with your day. And I think for me, achieving it in these kind of like bite-sized work sessions and writing sessions was just, it helps relieve that block of, oh my God, I'm staring at a blank page for hours and I don't know what to do. I think just giving yourself a specific time to focus and just to like be flexible with yourself really helps. And knowing that there's an endpoint to it also makes it less scary. So that's for me, like an early career writer, that's what's been working. And you'll be surprised what comes out when you're not so afraid or, you know, so stuck on doing what you think is the most productive or perfect thing. You're just setting time for yourself to do it for a little bit, and that's it. So that's been helping me in terms of the last 3 months of figuring this out. But Zach, I'd love to hear how you've kind of gotten to your point and what you think works.
Well, Frank, I mean, I think 6 years to have something written and made and all the success that you've had is incredible. It took me, I mean, I didn't have this is my first feature that's been produced, and I've been writing for, you know, since I graduated in 2002. So whatever that is, 19 years. But, you know, the whole time I've been writing and trying to make sure that I was, you know, just being productive. And I worked in film production for a long time in New York after I graduated. And so I spent a lot of time on set in the art department on like Gossip Girl and a lot of stuff that was not the kind of stuff that I was writing, but it was really informative to have a script every day that I was reading and seeing how production interacted with it. And then also like I mean, as a lot of you will find, production work can be really grueling and daunting, and the hours are really long, but there's a lot of downtime. So if you're not manning the camera, or you're not an actor, or you're not the director, you do a lot of work at a very intense period, and then you have a little bit of time while they're shooting and you might be offset. So I used all that time when I was on set I would just write all the time. And I think that, I mean, as far as process, like I think the best thing that I found is to just not really have any expectation that it's ever going to be good. And so it's a lot easier to rewrite than it is to actually be staring at a blank page and say, how do I start this? So, you know, I mean, I outline pretty ferociously and I do a lot of research, but then when I'm trying to just like stare every morning at like a blank page, I try and just say, like, even if it's terrible, I'm just going to write and not look back and try to get a certain, you know, I try to get somewhere between 5 and 10 pages a day done, but I would never show it to anyone because I know it sucks. And then once I'll try to do that for a whole script, and then I'll take that script and I will go back and then spend, you know, months just really painstakingly writing, rewriting constantly over and over again until I feel like, well, you know, I don't know, I've exhausted every option. So hopefully, you know, like I put together, I know it's readable, I know it's presentable, and then I have faith that at least like I really put everything I had into it before I let anyone see it. I think I'm just
Yeah, then comes the prayer process of,
Yeah.
oh God, hopefully somebody will read this and like it. We know that process well.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I think I found that not being precious has been the biggest, like the most productive thing that I have is just if I want to make sure I finish something and then go back and I can revise it. And also I think that like one tip I learned, I think at Hopkins early on was in a writing class was like, if you have a good flow going, try to actually stop before like you finish the thing that you think is like the whole section. Because if you can start the next day knowing exactly, I have this like top of this scene I want to write and I already know it, well then maybe save that for the next day, because then you can start the day like already knowing where you're getting off. Because sometimes just like getting up in the morning, trying not to look at the craziness in the world on the news, and like having some easy entry point in is really helpful.
Yeah, it's a great note. And I think, you mentioned, Zach, that you'd read a lot of scripts by virtue of being on set in your producerial capacity. That's like invaluable. The fact that so many of your favorite TV shows and movies have scripts available online to read and just understand the formatting and understand the flow and understand where act breaks are coming in and all of that. I spent a ton of time before I ever typed on a keyboard, right, for creative writing, just kind of understanding what the good scripts were supposed to look like. And that's something that you can do for free, just with the old Google. All right, next up is Jane. You're on the spot. You've been on the buyer and seller side, right? So when I say buyer, I mean just for the room, the network side, the people commissioning and paying for the network or studio side. You've also been on the seller side as an independent producer. What advice do you have for students unsure about where to find a foothold? Like, which way do you go, buyer or seller?
I always tell people when they're starting out that there's no set route to do anything in this industry. I think if you know you're a writer, obviously you're going to keep writing. That's the idea. It's your muse, and that's what you're doing all the time. So you may have another job, but you're writing when you're not doing that job, and that's your passion. Finding what you want to do in this industry, the industry has so many aspects to it that it's almost an excess of riches to choose from. So to me, I happened to get a job at Disney, but I started in politics. I worked on Capitol Hill for several years, and then I ended up doing documentaries, and then I went to work at Disney. So I was already, what one would consider an older person when I came out here. But that kind of base of working on Capitol Hill among a lot of powerful people made me less easily intimidated by my bosses that I went to work for. So there is no one particular route that is the perfect route to do what you think you want to do. And then once you think you know what you want to do and do it, you may decide that's not for me at all. You may want to do something else. There are so many opportunities. So there's no way to know whether something's going to be the perfect job for you, but just know that you're going to learn from it. I think if you think about buyer versus seller, it's always easier to be a buyer. There is no doubt about that. It's always easier to be in the position to be able to option a project and move on it with all the resources that a big network or a streamer or a studio has to offer. If you want to be a producer, if you want to go the independent route, then you need to be a self-starter. And the only way to know that is to try it, really. Some people will go down that route and realize, I'd rather be a buyer. I can't do this. This is too hard for me, because you really have to be a self-starter. So, the phone, someone once told me that if you're going to go the producer route, when I was a studio exec and I was thinking of doing it, I went to several friends of mine, and they, to a person, said, the phone stops ringing, period. It stops ringing when you become a producer. You have to generate the calls to get the calls back. Whereas when I was at the studio, people were calling all the time because they had something to sell to me. So you have to be prepared for that. But those are decisions you make along the way. Those are experiences that build to what you decide you think is what you want to do. But, you know, every one of the projects I've done as a producer or an executive have been totally different, have given me a different set of experiences. And that's how you build a career, basically, along the way. And I can see myself changing again. Maybe I won't produce in 5 years. Who knows, you know? That's the nice thing about working in this industry. But if you have a passion for a particular craft, that's another thing entirely. So if you want to be a cinematographer, you need to learn your craft from the bottom up. When you're a producer, you're just accumulating projects to sell and then following them all the way through. It's very different skill set. So yeah, I think that's a sort of roundabout way of answering that question.
It's a great answer, Jane. And you're right. There are so many facets and so many just little peculiar corners of the industry that we don't necessarily associate with being a part of the industry, right? Like, you know,
No.
for current students at either Hopkins or Johns Hopkins, the idea of buyer versus seller probably seems almost foreign, but it is truly a business. And just like finance or medicine or law, there are mechanics on both sides of the fence and many, many roles within each of those mechanics. So a lot of opportunity. Next up, and speaking of self-starters, Brian Scope, Mr. Scope, you do a lot of TV. You've also done a lot of digital. And, you know, as we see the proliferation of really, really big streamers, right, almost forming a new sort of cable paradigm, or even with the Netflixes and Hulus, a new broadcast TV paradigm. What do you think the real estate is like for the little guy in digital, the scrappiness of the 2008 through 2014, 15 years? Are there still opportunities in digital for self-starters, or is it just, if you're not with Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, don't even try? HBO Max, I should say, too.
No, I mean, yes, it's certainly shifted, and the landscape is changing considerably. I think in those early 2000s, there was just this proliferation of content with all different platforms as everything sort of moved not only from network to cable, but now cable to the streamers. And the streamers are certainly the primary target now for most of us independent producers. You know, I work primarily as a showrunner director in the documentary and unscripted space, and that's evolved as well. That's become more like the limited documentary series you're seeing on Netflix a lot now, and Amazon, where those used to be 100 episode series where they buy a character and say, go out and make some stuff and keep it coming. Now people are realizing that with just this clutter of content out there, they want to make one big, strong impact. And so they're trying to kind of package something as tightly as they can and make it as accessible as they can as sort of one big hit that might draw in subscriptions. So I've seen, to answer your question directly, I've seen the landscape really splinter to those big platforms, the ones you named, and then also all the digital outlets that are not them. So whether it be internet-based, whether it be subscription-based, and what's happened really is there's still room in both places, but the budgets have gone either astronomically large, in which case you want the access or you need the talent behind something that will really anchor something for one of the big boys. You know, when we're talking about Amazon and Disney Plus and Netflix, the pitches that we now bring in to the buyers there have to have something that only we have. Where it used to be, we could make a documentary about, you know, anyone who's a champion, who has achieved, and we'll call it Champions, and let's focus on, you know, 20 different champions across this series. Now you have to have, you know, Tiger Woods signed and Michael Jordan signed, and you're walking in with them as the anchor for this entire series. In the smaller sort of cheaper model, that's a lot more fluid, and that's more fluid than it's ever been, in the sense that you can make something for an incredibly low budget, whereas back in those early 2000s, late 1990s, you still needed the big beta cams. I was around, I'm sure all of us, some of us who've been around for the beta cams and the big decks and film before that, you can film shows now in sizzle reels on an iPhone. So if you have the right access, you can make something for incredibly cheap and make it look incredibly well with a DSLR. So the market's really splintered, which means that if you're an independent producer, it just comes down to targeting what you're going after. You can't just have a singular idea. It's kind of quickly assessing the idea, whether it be a subject matter, whether it be a subject as in a person, and saying, where does this live best? Does this live best as a podcast? Does it live best as a digital series? Does it live best as a big swinging grand slam, limited doc series? And then package it that way and go out to those buyers.
Great answer. Can you talk a little bit as a follow-up just about what packaging means for those of us who may not know? And I should say it's both on the scripted and unscripted side, we package, and that's become a really crucial part of the sales process in our industry. But Brian, I think it'd be interesting to hear from you.
Absolutely. Packaging is really exactly what it sounds like in terms of creating a package of talent or a package that you're bringing to a buyer where all the boxes are checked. So for instance, I was recently working on something that's still in pre-production development, seems to have been for forever. But it's a limited documentary series about looking at sort of the cutting edge of medicine and how humans are evolving. And the package that we brought to Netflix with that one was the access. We went to all those leading doctors and researchers in the world and got them to sign on with an option to say, we are working with you and only you on this project. Secondarily, we went to, I direct, but I'm not an Oscar-winning director. So if you bring on an Oscar-winning director, we were working with someone who had won an Oscar recently for a Netflix doc, and you bring that person in as the primary vision. Now you have the entity of the production company that's going to make it, you have the access, and you have the visionary. And by walking in with those three things as a package, there really isn't much room for them to get something that doesn't reach their expectations. That's really what it's about, is having an answer for any questions they might have about the project that means it won't succeed. So if you can check all the boxes that say, we have a DP who did this and you've seen it and you liked it. We have a director who did this. We have the producers behind that. It builds confidence with the buyer that when they invest, Luke was talking about buyers and sellers. It's very much, I always use the analogy that it's very much like being a contractor building a house. Yep. We are artists and we like making what we make and we want to put our stamp on it. But at the end of the day, someone's paying for it. And so if they want really awful green faucets in their house, we can fight them on it. We can try. But at the end of the day, if they're staunch about it, then we're going to find the best green faucets we can. We're going to make it work. And so that's what the package is about, making them feel comfortable putting the house in your hands.
It's a great analogy. And we're looking forward to your Oscar-winning doc, Green Faucets, very, very soon. We're thrilled. Thank you, Brian. That's very helpful. So Ryan, next question. As a creative executive, you're sort of the fulcrum for creative decisions, right? You're reading a ton of scripts. You're figuring out what projects are going to be those that Temple Hill's going to champion versus those that maybe go by the wayside in the scripted space. Can you talk a little bit about what makes you spark to a project versus what things kind of turn you off when you're reading?
Yeah, totally. It's kind of simple, really. I just look for stories that have rich and complex characters that feel, fully formed human beings, and they feel like they jump off the page. And I mean, other than that, in the screenwriting itself, you're always looking for a writer who has a great voice. Is the way that their story is being told unique and fresh, and underneath it all, do they have something to say? What is sort of like a red flag for me is when you feel like a script lacks a sense of authority or authenticity, and it feels like you're reading maybe like more of a dramatization of events, like a Wikipedia page or a history lesson without a focus on character. And specifically for our production company, like we have a first look deal at Paramount. So it's like a weird position we're in, because the mandate of our home studio sort of becomes our mandate. They pay our overhead, they keep the lights on. So we have an obligation as a company to find material for our home studio. And for example, at Paramount, they're in the middle of restructuring and they're looking to double down on theatrical movies, which I wholeheartedly support. But, to have a movie sell at, big Paramount, in their theatrical division, you have to have a project that has a clean and a clear concept that is sort of so undeniable that you feel so strongly that it will have the potential to make $300 million at the box office. Like, no joke, Emma Watts was on a Zoom with us the other day and she was like, guys, if you don't feel that it will make $300 million, like, it is not for the Paramount Big Division. It's not going to be like one of our 12 movies that we put out in, the next year. So you get movies like A Quiet Place, which has like a really clear concept that everyone can understand. You can sort of pitch that in like one sentence, and someone like John Krasinski can come in and execute it at the highest level. You also have like Rocket Man, where like it's a traditional musical set to the music of one of the most iconic musicians of all time. And then you have something like Sonic, where it's a feature adaptation of a beloved video game. And if it's not one of those things, it has to be an exciting filmmaker or some, attachment, or some reason why a movie needs to be made and seen today. And an example of that is sort of like The Trial of the Chicago 7. Aaron Sorkin writing and directing is undeniable. And that specific story was one that needed to be told, and it needed to be told and released in this moment right before the election, because it had such a important relevance to today.
Yeah, well said. And what do you think about, for newer writers in reading this glut of scripts that come across your desk? Is write what you know truly the best thing when you're starting out? Write a story that's personal to you, write a story that if it's about an industry or a job, it should be one that you've held or currently hold, rather than the sort of, all right, I'm going to do research about this area and try to write a script as my first go. What's your take on that?
I feel like it always helps to like write what specific. I mean, just because you have a lot of experience and authority in what you are writing, it comes across as authentic and a story that is unique because you are telling that story. Obviously, you can research as much as you want, and if you're going that route, you need to have like researched and prepared to make yourself an authority in whatever it is you're telling.
Helpful. Thank you, Ryan. Next one's for Claire. So Claire, you've done a lot, right? You were working in development on some really high level projects, and then transitioned into being a senior casting scout. Talk a little bit about that transition and what catalyzed it. And then also I'm curious, what's a day in the life? You do a ton on such huge properties. Can you just give us the spiel?
Yeah, definitely. It's actually book scouting day to day. Wish casting sounds fun though. So I would say that I love development. I definitely miss big parts of it. But in my experience, I found that there was kind of like this really cool marriage of books and film, which were both passions of mine. I was also a writing sums double major undergrad. And while I was working in development for Tom McCarthy, I was finding books and just trying to get more things optioned for him, and really kind of loved the book to film space. It's such a small, narrow world. And when this opportunity came along to scout for Netflix, I had that moment of like, I think I will always look back on that and wonder what it would have been like to do that. So the great thing about working for Netflix is there's 1,010,000 different mandates, and they are producing so much and looking for so many different things that, at least from the book side, it means that almost everything that comes across my desk is something to consider for them, because they want big budget sci-fi, they want smaller stuff for their indie directors and their indie group. They're looking more and more internationally. So, I mean, day to day, there's nothing that's quite specific about it. Like today, a good example is, I don't know if there's any Sally Rooney fans in the room, but she just announced that her new book is going to deliver this fall, which basically means that I spent the morning trying to figure out, oh my God, when is it going to be out for film? When is that option happening? So, there's kind of like big top level stuff like that. Day to day is also tracking what books are on submission to publishers that might be interesting for Netflix, tracking what books are then out for film, which is sometimes, but not always, a different timeline than when they go out to publishers, and tracking what is being offered on and any sort of articles, podcasts, anything that's really popping in the world, on top of just, constantly talking to the Netflix teams and seeing what they want to make.
So do all of the teams at Netflix feed into your division, and like whether it be comedy or drama, or everybody's sort of coming to you and your department for recommendations? Is that sort of how it works?
Yeah, and some things are more common for books or not. We don't talk to, I don't have as much overlap with the comedy team, just because they are finding that from scripts and not necessarily stuff that's IP based. But the doc team we're constantly talking to, because that is such a rich space, and we're scouting everything, articles, books, kind of everything under the sun for them. So it is like definitely depends on what the group might be looking for a little bit more, but overall, definitely the more narrative, narrative and doc side is where we're definitely spending most of our time.
And would you say that IP or intellectual property now is more crucial than it's ever been to kind of get heat behind most projects, given how flooded the marketplace is with content? Talk a little bit about that versus maybe, 5 or 10 years ago, when maybe there was more original stuff, or maybe there wasn't. Maybe we just weren't as aware.
Yeah, I think books and IP has become a bit of a feeding frenzy, which I think is great for authors. They're getting more money than ever. A lot of authors are now, being able to write and adapt their own stuff. That's becoming more and more commonplace, which I think is really great. I think it just speaks to the fact that there are so many different platforms and streamers and buyers and networks and everything under the sun that are looking for material and content, that IP has just become a great space, because you can option a book that's a great idea and then pair a writer later, or, as we've been talking about, packaging, be a production company, find that great book, find that writer, and then go out with it to buyers. So it's just become kind of like a bit of like a, not exactly fail safe, but a great place to start, and you can kind of build it in both ways.
Interesting. Good answer. All right. I want to ask you one more thing, and then this is going to be for the group, but we'll start with you and then go around the horn. So, I often find when people call me and ask about my path and ask about, there's this sense of, especially from schools like Johns Hopkins and Hopkins, there's this sense of, it's not really a path in entertainment. And Jane, you brought it up. It's everybody forges their own way. And with peers who are going into finance or consulting or medical school or law, there's a lot of apprehension about the fact that there's not, one textbook to read from for this stuff. And so I'm curious, Claire and everyone else, was there one confidence building moment in your career where you felt like, oh, I can actually do this, and I see that there's a path ahead? And can you talk a little bit about what that moment might have been?
Yeah. Jane, I feel like you put it so well earlier too, but I think for me it was, like most nervous, like stressed out, overworked, very high achieving Hopkins students, I didn't know what I was going to do, and everyone else was applying to become, doctors or go into finance. So I applied to get my master's degree in film studies, and got to Columbia and was like, great, I'm sure I'll figure stuff out here. and had a class with James Seamus, who I looked up to both as a writer, director, and running Focus at the time. And I was like, great, I have a class with Seamus. He's going to tell me what's up, and I can figure it out from there. And kind of the first thing he said is that nobody has any clue what they're doing. I had no clue what I was doing. I figured out along the way. There's no one path. So that was kind of a funny moment that reinforced that I was like, oh yeah, if someone who I look up to like this is, saying the same things that I'm feeling, it's one of those things where you just have to strike your own path. I will say when I got the first book that I found was Tom optioned when I was working for Tom McCarthy. That was a good feeling of like, oh, I understand taste. I can seek something out that he likes, that we had a deal at Paramount TV at the time they liked. So it was one of those just like swirling moments where I think I was just able to pick something where I was like, oh, this combines books and film and it really works for me. So maybe I'll keep going down that path.
Cool. Brian, what about you?
It was interesting. I was combing through my memories as you had asked. I think there are really two moments that stand out. One is sort of early on as I can produce these things and direct these things, and then earlier on and later on as a showrunner. The early one was when I was working for ESPN and we were doing a Sports Century series. We were going around and we were interviewing all these legendary athletes and telling the stories of the past 25 years across 25 episodes. And the senior producer I was with got ill, and I was, I think, 23 or 24, and we couldn't cancel the interview. So they kind of just sort of said, why don't you sit in and interview Roger Clemens? And I'm a big baseball fan. So I felt like a kid sitting across from a legend, but I had the questions, I had the passion to ask, and across those 2 hours, we got everything we needed and more so. And I think getting back in the edit room, seeing the mistakes I made, but then also seeing the places where I did do well, instilled a confidence. And I think later on as a showrunner, I went to Africa for a History Channel show, and I worked under a showrunner at the time as a supervising producer who, think how to say this kindly, who didn't plan as well as I think should have been planned. And I actually contracted malaria while we were in country and ended up getting flown around in helicopters from one village to the next trying to look for anti-malarials. And it sort of shined a light for me just on not only the story you're trying to tell, but the infrastructure of how you have to build a production to make sure that you're thinking of everything. And kind of seeing that happen and knowing that I would have done it differently instilled the confidence moving forward.
Yeah, not everybody has the answers. No matter what stage they're at, you can always bring something new to the table. That's a cool point. Diana, what about you?
Yeah, I love this theme because I love sharing and love hearing other people's stories about how they got there, and absolutely reiterating that there's not one path. Everyone kind of has to find their own way. I graduated and didn't really know what I was going to do. I knew I had to go back home. I'm from New York City, and I was like, okay, I got to be able to pay rent, and I need to be able to like not be like close to homeless. I was like, okay, I need to get a job. Not always is that going to mean you're going to be a director right away. You're going to be like somehow speeding your way up the ladder from PA to the head of your department. For me, it meant working in advertising. And for the last 9 years, I've been building a career as a producer, commercial producer and advertising producer. So you also learn a lot from not necessarily along the way. So as a producer, I learned how to build things from scratch, how to budget, how to hire a crew, how to negotiate, how to make sure, like Brian said, all of the things are planned out and there's a structure there to succeed when you're telling a story or to succeed when you're, shooting something. So a lot of experience learned, not necessarily the really artistic route. I definitely felt a certain way about going commercial, but then learned a lot in that path. And because of that, I was able to produce my own film. I saved up enough money to be able to quit and finally get the courage to write and direct my own story. So now, because I have built that, I'm able to kind of take time off when I need to write and dedicate to my art and to my passion. And when I need to, I can pick up freelance producing work here and there to pay the bills or to feel a little bit more secure. But I think there's no one way. And the only time I realized that I was meant to be a filmmaker and meant to direct was the first day I was on set. Leading up to that, I was an anxious mess. I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to make it. I shot in the Caribbean with a crew of Hopkins kids who were my best friends from school. And I was like, we're shooting during hurricane season in the middle of the Caribbean in August. Like, this could all fall apart tomorrow. But just arriving on set that first day, all of that anxiety just kind of melted away, because once you're prepared and you're telling your own story, no one knows it best. So I think that was the moment where I was like, oh, I'm meant to be here. I'm meant to do this. And you just kind of take it one shot at a time. So I think that moment of finally just being on set for the first time as a first-time director, that was just my clarifying, this is where I want to be and this is what I want to do. So it might take years to get there, and you may not even in the moment feel like it's right, but there will be a moment where you will get that validation from yourself. So
Well said.
you guys can do it.
Well said. Jane?
There were a couple of paths that I've taken, things that I've done that have cemented who I am. Actually, being a lit major in college was really important for me, because when I came to that point where I got the job at Disney and I had to do notes on scripts as a creative executive, that stood me in great stead. I knew how to look at a script as a piece of literature, basically, with a story that either worked or didn't work, and how you could fix it or make it better or make it come alive, and be able to communicate your thoughts effectively to a writer or the writers. And Disney had this reputation when I started there of having notes that were like doorstops. They were literally almost as long as the scripts, and so much minutiae, it made your head spin. And I was brought up in the sort of journalistic way of writing, with active prose and getting to the point quickly, who, what, when, where, and all of that. And they didn't write like that at all. So the first movie that I ever worked on to do notes on was actually Adventures in Babysitting, and it was Chris Columbus, who was a Spielberg protege and went on to direct Harry Potter and all these great movies. He wrote Goonies. He's a brilliant man. And so I was given the task of writing the first set of notes, and I came back with notes that were 7 pages long or something like that. And they all had this look of horror on their face, like, you can't give him this. I said, why not? And they said, but it's not long enough. I said, but it's got all the points in it, why spend all that time? And we gave him the notes, and he thought they were great. They were nice and concise to him, and he could go, and gave him enough leeway as a writer to be creative, which is the point. So at that point, I knew, oh, I can actually do this because of my education, actually, and how, and my own instincts too, as a creative person. And then the second seminal thing was when I was supervising White Fang, which was a movie with Ethan Hawke and Klaus Maria Brandauer, and it was directed by Randall Kleiser. And it was possibly the Murphy's Law of films. Everything went wrong on this film, everything. We lost our original director. The new director, Randall, got hepatitis. The producer got booted off because he insulted all the people in Haines, Alaska. It was like a perfect storm of complete garbage. Everything happened wrong. I didn't have a script that was done. So they shipped me off to Alaska, and I was up there for 2 months in sub-zero, 30 below weather, trying to get the script ready. And I loved being on set more than anything I'd ever done in my life. I loved being on set. And we had brought in this wonderful producer, Mary Kay Powell, who was really experienced, and she just let me into the process. And I was standing on that set going, this is what I need to do. I want to produce. And it took a while to get away from the cushiness of being an exec to going out on my own. But that moment where I didn't want to go back, they had to literally send someone to come take me back. I didn't want to leave. So that way, and then when I came back, they called me the Snow Queen, for like a month after that. But the movie turned out to be beautiful. It was a really wonderful movie, but it was born by fire. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed problem solving, standing on my feet. And that's the large part of being a producer, quite honestly. So.
Absolutely right. Great answer, Ryan.
Well, I mean, I totally agree that there is no one path, and I feel like there are so many days when I still wake up and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I was answering phones 4 months ago. What am I doing? How do I get stuff done? But when I graduated, I felt like I knew nobody. Luckily, I was from LA, and I moved back out here, and bought so many people coffee. It made my head spin, and thankfully I was living at home, because there was a lot of money going into buying a lot of coffees for a lot of people. And nobody, like had to help me, but I just, tried to be nice and just ask for advice on what to do to get a job. And eventually I knew a Hopkins alum who knew somebody at a production company who was looking for an unpaid intern. And it was working for Mark Platt as his unpaid intern. And I actually had to enroll in a class at a community college to learn how to use a Mac, so that I could take this internship for credit. But I got my foot in the door. I think I made my parents take me to see Wicked like 7 times when it was in LA. So I wanted to work for this producer. And I ended up making a bunch of friends and working hard. And through that, I got my foot in the door at an agency. I worked at UTA for 2.5 years and really got a bird's eye view of the industry. And from there, I went over to work at Paramount for Wick Godfrey, who at the time was the president of their motion picture group, and was very lucky in finding a boss who I connected with. We had very similar tastes, and he was very supportive of me. And when it was time to leave Paramount, he sort of was incredibly generous and was like, why don't you come with me over to Temple Hill? And, I believe in you. And like, to have someone like that, like, who's produced like the Twilight Saga, like The Hate U Give, First Man, to have someone like that tell you that like, I believe in you and I like want to give you this like chance to like advance in your career, it gave me like the biggest confidence boost. And that was sort of like recently the moment where I thought like, oh, I could be good at this. There's a lot to learn like every day, but that's sort of like the most recent moment where even though it feels like you don't know anything constantly, that there was that like glimmer of hope and like excitement that like, oh, this could be something that I could be doing as a job for the rest of my life.
I think, and before we get to Zach, I think that's a really interesting thing to kind of hang a lantern on for the attendees, and especially those who are students and thinking about getting into entertainment. And it's this idea that if you have a truly well-rounded kind of liberal arts education and are a self-starter and a doer and are interested in problem solving, no matter what sector of the industry you're in, we work in a business that's so fluid and so constantly changing that it's really about making relationships on the one hand, and then on the other hand, just saying, yeah, I can do that and I'll figure it out, no matter what level you're at. If you're a production assistant, if you're a writer's assistant, or if you're the head of a company or a studio or a network, it's like, okay, yeah, I can accept that challenge and I can use my past experiences to sort of piece together, just as Jane said in reviewing her first script, sort of piece together how this is supposed to go based on what I've learned up to this point. And it's that kind of reliance on not just formal education, but sort of life education that makes this industry so exciting and so different every day. Zach, what do you got?
I should be more prepared after everyone went. I think, I mean, one thing that I got a lot of confidence actually was when I was at Hopkins and I had writing classes there. I had a teacher, Lucy Bucknell, who I don't know, she's still there, but but I think I got good feedback on stuff, and I really I held on to that for a long time, that someone somewhere said I was okay at this. And that sustained a lot of years where no one was saying I was good at it. But I think in terms of finding a way through a career and actually figuring out that it was gonna work. I mean, I still don't have, I think it's good. I still don't have a ton of confidence that there will be another movie after this. There'll be another job. So one part of it is I just try and be very grateful that the opportunities that are there, and make sure I'm really going into each job and each story that I'm writing with the same energy and enthusiasm that I had with the first one that I took out. But I mean, like I said, I had a very winding path. I got out of Hopkins, and I knew one person who was not a film major, but he had a buddy that had just started a commercial production company in New York. And they're like, well, they need an intern. And I just said yes. And I spent, 10 years being in the art department on TV shows and movies and music videos, and was writing the whole time. But I worked on a movie very early on called Winter Passing, which was, no one has probably seen it, but it was this Ed Harris, who else? Zooey Deschanel movie. I was like an art PA. But I had a script that I'd started at Hopkins, and I'd finished it, and I thought it was pretty good, but had no idea what to do with it. And I met a writer who was attached to that movie. He was not the guy who wrote it, but he was working on another movie with a producer, and he very nicely said he would read it, and he read it and sent it to his managers. And that was that they didn't sign me, nothing happened, but just picking up a little bit of confidence along the way that people that I admired had said, keep going. So I think it can be a really difficult path, and you're looking for, and you could have something great, and it's still, you have to find the right producer, you have to find the right agent, the right studio. So even if you have something that's terrific, you got to really have a lot of perseverance, because the door that you might get offered the first time, that might not be the one that actually gets your project made or gets you the job that you want. But like everyone else has been saying, just being game to be on your feet and sort of pivot, from there and say, okay, well, they're not going to buy this script, but maybe we can work on something else, or what else? What other stories do I want to tell that might fit for them? And but yeah, I mean, I think it's just in some ways for my part of the industry, what I realized much later is it's kind of a numbers game, and you want to believe in everything that you're writing and everything that you're working on, that it's gold and you love it, but also know that if you're holding on to one thing, this is the one idea I got, then and you're not allowing yourself to investigate other ideas, find other stories, look at other paths, then you can spend a lot of time holding on to something and never letting it go, and it can be tough.
No, I think that's right. And one of the things that's so difficult about what we all do, and about what so many others do in the industry, is you have to kind of balance the feeling of caring about everything you do to the utmost, right? And being fanatical about making sure it's as good as it can possibly be, with the reality that most things don't go. And like Zach said, you have to be mercurial in sort of, okay, well, you're not going to do that. Well, what about this? Or what are you looking for? So that in 6 months, I can come back to you with a couple of ideas that may be right, or can write a script in mind for, several production companies who've told me they're looking for a similar thing. It's this constant push and pull of, what should I be focusing on at any one moment? And the more that you allow yourself, at least I've found, to allow that process to happen, and to say all right, woof, that was a rough day, but here are the other things I have looking forward to on the docket of projects, the more you can kind of rebound from some of those strikeouts and rejections, because they happen to all of us all the time, no matter what level you're at. You know?
And to piggyback on that real quick, timing is such an important thing as well. I think Ryan had mentioned earlier the trial of Chicago 7, which, yes, Sorkin was part of that, and that was going to go regardless because anything he touches is gold. But, projects that we've all brought to the market or that may be ready to go, or a script that Zach's written or Diana's written, right now might not be the right time to make it for whatever reason. I've been developing, we've been in development on a scripted project for a long time that's post-apocalyptic. And it just turns out that right now, when we're basically watching the apocalypse on the news every day, nobody wants to watch post-apocalyptic stuff. So what we're hearing from buyers is, let's not say no now. Let's pivot to these other projects that we're talking about. Let's put it on the back burner, and maybe in later in 2021 or 2022, we revisit it with a new lens. And so a lot of it is also just pivoting and being flexible within your vision.
I'd love to add one thing, if it's not too annoying and we're not running out of time. I'd also say, if there's something that you are extremely passionate about and you're willing to throw everything else away to make it happen, you just gotta also do it. I'm coming from a super indie perspective. Like, I got so much rejection on my first and only screenplay. Everyone said no. I had no real, I like abandoned directing and filmmaking when I went into advertising and commercial world, but I knew I had to tell the story. So I was willing to do it with the little resources I had. And hearing no can also, you guys are absolutely right. It can be like, hey, let me pivot. Let me see if there's something else. But if there's something that is just sticking with you and you need to get it done, just do it. Don't wait for a yes from a studio. Don't wait for a yes from a grant. See what resources you have access to right now and how you can make that happen. Like, the only reason I was able to do this is because I had a crew of 4 or 5, again, of my best friends at Hopkins, who were my tribe, who I graduated with, who we've supported each other since graduation on each other's work, reading scripts on each other's productions, who are willing to back me because they knew me and they believed in what I wanted to say when no one else would. So sometimes you just need to be scrappy as hell and pull it together with what you've got. And that is one thing that Hopkins taught me, from shooting on a really old 16mm camera with my 2 best friends in freezing cold Baltimore whenever we could. Like, they taught us to be scrappy, and sometimes you just also need to lean on that as well and not wait for the yes or wait for the permission. Just do it. If you have to do it, just do it, and do it the best you can. And then who knows, maybe HBO will buy your movie.
It's a great,
or not.
great point. No, yeah, probably not for many people, but yeah, for you, yeah. But you're right. There's this sense of, and I give this advice all the time. If you want to be a writer, just write. If you want to be a producer, get a collective together and produce. Same for directing, same for shooting, et cetera, et cetera. At some point, you do have to start doing the thing on your own. And sometimes that's what pops first, right? Sometimes you need a proof of concept in the marketplace to really prove to people that, okay, I can do this. And for new people, new entrants into the industry, that can often be the most powerful tool. So it's a really wonderful point, Diana.
Especially when there's so many new ways for distribution. You can self-distribute. There's other paths forward that aren't the traditional ways. So I don't want to discourage people either if they're hearing a lot of no's, because I was recently in that position, and you just sometimes need to push forward anyway.
Yeah,
if you believe in it enough.
It's a great addition and a fantastic point. I do want to get us into our breakout rooms. I want to take a couple of quick questions. Before I do that, thank you guys for going through those questions with us. Tremendously helpful, tremendously informative. I wish we could talk about this for 2 or 3 hours. Maybe not all of you do who aren't on West Coast time, but I want to take some questions from the group. I'm seeing that some of my panelists are chiming in real time, and so many things have already been answered. But if your question has not been answered, take a second now, put it in the chat, and we'll take 1 or 2 of them before dismissing to breakout rooms. Let's see. And I'm so impressed with you guys that you're answering these questions as we're doing a panel. This is like truly 2021 speed. Okay, so could anyone offer advice on getting financing for film projects? Who wants to take that one?
Are we talking indie?
Indie films?
Yeah, it seems like indie films is what we're looking at.
I can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, you're
Yes, indie
probably
films.
deeper in the trenches. I haven't
Yeah.
done an indie film in about 3 years, so I'm trying to put one together now. But you've just done one, so
Yeah, I'm
Diana,
happy to
you go ahead.
speak to that. Well, I think for me, I did get a lot of the rejections and I hadn't proven myself yet to like be worthy of a grant or anything like that. So I just did like a really intense grassroots fundraising effort. And my film, you have to look for the audience that you're speaking to. Number one is understand who you're making the film for and who would be excited about the work that you're doing. My story specifically, I shot it in the Dominican Republic where my family's from, and it was a specific story about, being separate from your culture, being separate from your homeland, and like trying to maintain that connection. So of course, my first instinct was like, let me talk to other Latino people out there to see who's interested in seeing this story be told, seeing this country and this landscape on screen that we don't often see. And it really just takes, in my case, I was extremely lucky and privileged to find one person who was not at all in the film industry, but was excited about art and excited about having their name as an executive producer on something, who gave me like $5,000, which was huge for me at the time. And they're like, oh, I have a friend who also doesn't know about film, but is really excited to get a credit on something like this, as long as we can go to the premiere. So you like hopefully find that right person, if you're lucky, who will then domino effect introduce you to more people. I also put a lot of my own money into the film, which not everyone can do. I had saved up a lot from working, as I'd mentioned, in the advertising as a producer. So I kind of went broke for it, but then I came back immediately after shooting and started another job. So it's literally about just pushing the hustle as much as you can and keeping your budget as low as possible early on. We shot my feature for $80,000, raised an additional $30K for post-production after shooting, which I partially financed out of pocket because I was freelancing after. So you really just got to do what you can to push it forward day by day. But be smart. You don't want to also like go broke, and you need to be responsible about what you can handle as well. But that's just from like a super indie perspective. I know people who have pitched and successfully sold ideas and scripts to studios. I just don't have that experience. But that was just what happened to me. And I really hope that I can do that again. But
Yeah, but
and I think if you're going to do a micro budget movie, the thing to do when you're right out of school and doing this is a micro budget movie.
exactly.
You don't want to take a script that is post-apocalyptic like Brian's, unless it's two people in a desert. You don't want to do that for your first outing. You want something that has an indie sensibility that you could make for a budget that's really self-contained.
Exactly.
I mean, people are doing desktop movies for next to nothing now, in the middle of COVID. I think that's going to be a blip on our radar at a certain point, but hopefully, you can make those for next to nothing and sell them and make them inventive and interesting.
Right.
But you have to keep a sense of proportion to what you're doing and keep your passion level up. And there are going to be angels that are out there who will give you money. You can do crowdsourcing, and aim it to certain groups. And and the thing to do is just talk to people who do this. They're happy to talk to you about their methods, especially alumni, about what they've been doing recently and how they've raised money. But you really do need to keep that price point down for your first film.
And one more thing I would add is a indie film that we're working on right now. We didn't want to put a ton of resources behind it. So what we did is we put a sort of a fraction of the cost behind it and went and filmed a strategic. We did about a 10-minute teaser that we're then also cutting down into the 2-minute trailer. And it's sort of a taste. It's the DP that will film it. And it's from our shooting script at this point. But that with a 25-page deck and treatment, it's sort of with the script that's going out to explain where it will shoot, how it will shoot. It has a preliminary budget. All of that information going to a potential investor is going to say that, they've dotted their I's and crossed their T's, and they're seeing enough to instill that confidence. But finding that money is still through the network usually, like Diana said.
That's right. So one more, just because I think it's particularly relevant, and then we're gonna break. The question is, how important is it to attend a college that has specific majors for your entertainment interests versus a liberal arts degree and using networking to start your career? I can quickly take this just to say, I worked in finance right out of school, right? And I've heard others, both on this panel and beyond, who had careers that were completely opposite the ones that they currently have now in entertainment. A really balanced liberal arts education where you learn how to communicate, where you learn how to write, where you learn how to read comprehensively, where you learn how to build relationships with people in a broad sense, right? From different walks of life with different interests. That's what's going to serve you the best in the entertainment industry. And it's a long life and there's a lot of ways to be involved. I think one of the things that can be potentially damaging is if you pigeonhole yourself so early on in the process as a high school junior or senior, and you don't really know what you want to do yet, right? So my advice would be go to the best educational institution that you can and pursue your passion there while learning what other passions may be on the horizon that you're not even aware of yet. And with that, team, a big round of virtual applause to all of you. Thank you so much again for taking the time to be with us here tonight. Thank you to all of our attendees, all page 1 out of 6 of you. And we're going to go into some breakout rooms now for more focused conversation, but really another wonderful session. Thanks so much and have a great night.
Hi, everyone. So thank you so much, Luke, and all of our amazing panelists. You guys are unbelievable. I got so much out of that. So at this time, as Luke said, we're going to go into breakout rooms. Just pick the one you want to go in and visit with your favorite panelist. You can jump around. If you need assistance, I'm here for you. We're going to try and not keep our panelists too late. I know that they have other stuff to do. So don't keep them too late. And panelists, when you're ready to leave, please feel free to duck out. Thank you again. I'm going to stop the recording.